Ruth, 10 paddlers transited the entire 42 miles of the river, examining both banks, i.e. 84 miles of bank, from the Mass border to New Milford. And what we determined was what I had suspected, was that the Housatonic Wild and Scenic section was still within the management capability of knotweed. And in fact, we just resolved the most potent piece of knotweed on the Housatonic. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, well,
Yeah. Right here. So in a sense, we've proven two things. A, knotweed can be killed. It basically took 3 years, but it's because it was so large, the treatment only occurred this far in year 1, and then this was year 2. In the 3rd year, we only did spot treatment. And we have one last plant in the far right section of the meadow here, which Christian is going to inject in a little while, and that will be our final knotweed in this management area. And we're going to demonstrate a different method. We had used foliar application here, i.e. spraying. That's with 3% glyphosate. And he's going to inject glyphosate into the stems of that plant. And that will then go immediately at this time of the year down into the roots to kill the root system. So the thing about knotweed, which is why it is the weed that took over the world, is 60% of the biomass of the plant is underground. So once you establish a knotweed, and if you just cutting the tops once in a while, like they do up in Massachusetts, they're making zero progress. They will be doing that until our democracy fails. What they're also doing there with their over-the-fence mower is they're spewing fragments of knotweed into the Housatonic River, which will drift downstream. And this dammed area behind the rising dam will become like that area above the Sheffield Bridge. Just a ribbon of knotweed. What was happening here is that ribbon was starting to expand to the north and south. So it is manageable. In the natural setting like this, it's a lot easier if you're here in year 1 or 2 and it's 1 or 2 sprigs like this. That's not knotweed, by the way. Rather than, how many square feet did you ever calculate that, Christian?
We had, I think it was just about a little under an acre, correct?
Under an acre, I would say.
Yeah.
But at any rate, extremely.
Yeah, the whole piece around.
It had been established 20 years ago in contaminated fill, by the way, according to the owner. And so those roots had penetrated extremely far down below the ground. They can extend their roots 15 to 20 feet underground. Bob Gambino, being fully aware of the biology of the plant, calculated his chemical treatment accordingly. And quite honestly, anybody can kill the tops of the plants. Killing the roots is the solution to the problem. And so when you've got root fragments coming out of the gravel pit and you're moving those around, boy, you're just, in the towns around here, you just keep shooting yourself in the foot. No wonder your landscape is wounded with invasives. It's you know that old phrase from the 70s, we have met the enemy and it is us. It's absolutely the case in the example of knotweed, where the human vector more than birds or floating down seeds on a river or any other vector is what distributes that plant. And of course it was brought from Asia originally to England in the 1850s and then to North America in the 1890s. And did you say Boston was the entry point?
Yes, and it was planted really first in New Hampshire.
Really?
And New Hampshire is the state with the worst infestation.
And New Hampshire...
It was brought from Japan by the ambassador from England, and he was a horticulturalist in 1865. That 1860s, he came back to Britain and took an example of it to the major Chelsea flower show, and it won first prize.
In 1865?
1860s.
1860. Wow. Who's underneath that
It's Carrie Noble.
Hi, Carrie.
Wow,
wow, kiddo. Wow, that's interesting. You won first prize. Well, listen, that speaks to a certain point about invasives. All invasives have at least one positive attribute. A beautiful blossom, a red color, a bunch of berries. Witness bittersweet. Unfortunately, those horticulturalists were not thinking holistically. They only were thinking about one facet of the plant. And of course, when in the history of horticulture did the word invasive come into existence? Does anybody know?
Probably 10 years ago.
More than that.
About 30, because noxious weeds came into being in the 40s under FDR, and then the invasive plant executive order was signed by Bill Clinton in 1993.
93. Okay, so 25, 28, 30 years ago. Okay, so and back then you may remember Bruce Babbitt. He was put in charge of the former governor of New Mexico, created the Center for Biodiversity or something like that. Do you remember that? That was, and there was starting to be a recognition that we needed to preserve the biodiversity on the planet. And we do know now that second only to development, plant diversity is most impacted by invasive plants.
I think for Ruth, she should know too that in England they are so invaded by knotweed that for the last several years it's impossible to get a mortgage on a property if you have knotweed on it. It's also impossible to sell your property. And this spring, they even in the middle of the pandemic, they held a special meeting at the Parliament, and they made it law now that you have to eradicate 10 feet on your other side, not on your property, but on the other side of the adjacent property before you can sell a property. Because it's taking over. It's sinking the island.
Yeah, that speaks to an interesting point about that biomass, 60% underground. Hey, that's where it's happening. It doesn't recognize a property boundary at all. Shooting up, comes up into your garden. Hey, in Northampton, the community garden has knotweed growing in it. It's coming in from an adjacent property. I have a friend in Somerville, Mass, and she's got the same problem coming in from her. Hey, it should be said about New Hampshire, despite their long history of knotweed's establishment, has under its Department of Agriculture one of the most aggressive, thoughtful, comprehensive knotweed management programs of any state in New England, for sure. Way ahead of Connecticut. Their 38-page manual is the Bible of knotweed management. I should add, on Wednesday of this coming week, during the course of the day from about 8:30 to 3 is the 12th or whatever Yukon Invasive Plant Symposium, and its theme is realistic methodology for treatment of invasive. And so if you want to really get smart about a lot of invasives and how to deal with it, go to CIPWG, CIPWG, Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group, sipwig.uconn.edu, and you will see that link in there. And I'll be giving this talk during that afternoon breakout session.
It's a virtual.
Yeah, the whole thing is virtual. You don't go to UConn anymore for this purpose. Christian and I have gone for the past couple of years, and but hey, there's going to be a lot of practical, applicable information during that program. Actually, you should pass that on to that whole Millbrook Garden Club.
I will.
Yeah, that. Okay, so it's almost time for our swim. Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Richard.
Sure, that's it.
I will. Yeah. I will.